Welcome to the Making of Me podcast, where we explore the experience, decision that shape who we have become. Our today's guest is JD Pincus, a social psychologist, author, and human motivational expert who study the emotional need that drive behavioral decisions making and our well-being. Through his work, including the emotional and agile brain, JD offers a framework for others understanding why people feel and act the way they do, linking emotion, burnout, leadership, and human motivation into one unified model. It's really a pleasure and honor to have you on the show, JD.
Thanks for having me. Good to be
Yeah,
here.
yeah, thank you so much. So, JD, can you take us back to the experience in your life that first pushed you into the question, how human emotion and behavior really work?
Yeah. So I guess when I was before college, I was in a band for a little while. There was a rock and roll band, and it's funny, the band was called Controlled Aggression, so it already had a kind of an emotional, you know,
Yeah,
it was hardcore punk. It was a very emotional time for me, and I had to make a decision about whether or not to go to college at that point or stay with the band. I think I made the right decision. I went to college, but I got to college and then I went to grad school. And I remember hearing from all of these psychology professors that really the only thing that mattered is what we were thinking about, and that emotion really wasn't even treated as a serious subject. Emotion, I think, tended to be treated as if it were some sort of leftover from, Sigmund Freud. That we have these dark impulses or sexual impulses or whatever it is, and that's the stuff that's primitive and not worthy of study, which is to me completely crazy because I knew that everything that I did or my friends did was driven by emotion, not rationality.
yeah,
And they were teaching us methods like, you would characterize how cogent these arguments were, how persuasive they were by their logic, that sort of thing. And the number of arguments that were made. To me, it didn't seem right at all. And they kind of treated everything else as being some sort of, they call it the peripheral route, things that basically don't matter
yeah,
or don't matter as much. So that didn't feel right. So when I started getting my degree, my PhD, I needed to find people who kind of saw the world the way I did. And I found Ross Buck, who is a major motivational theorist, but he was sort of a joint appointment between psychology and consumer communication science. I ended up doing my research in a different building entirely because, I wasn't doing, survey paper and pencil. I was doing stuff where you hooked people up to monitors and used hidden cameras and it basically we're measuring their emotion, which to me felt like real science, not sort of pretend. So they didn't know what to do with me, so I graduated. Actually
yeah,
graduated faster than anyone I think in the history of that program because I wasn't of any use to these professors because my worldview was very different than theirs. Lo and behold, fast forward, I don't know, 40 years, 30 years, I guess. A lot has happened in the world. The invention of fMRI imaging, the invention of behavioral economics. Daniel Kahneman wins the Nobel Prize for prospect theory. All of that basically emphasizing that emotions drive our decisions. They drive our behavior, not our
yeah,
thoughts. And in fact, our thinking is sort of this epiphenomenon, this thing that kind of comes along for the ride to basically make up stories for ourselves and others to justify what we do. But what we do is because of how it feels. And one of the things that I saw in my work was that there was a kind of a basic misunderstanding about what emotions are. A lot of people basically were defining feelings as emotions. So if I'm feeling happy or I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling afraid, I'm feeling angry, that they said was emotion because that's what you could show on your face or in your voice. But to me, those are not actually emotions. Those are just momentary feeling states that come and they go. They're not particularly meaningful. What really matters are the emotional needs that you're trying to satisfy. And that when those emotional needs are met, you feel satisfaction, contentment, happiness. It launches those feelings. And when those things are blocked, you can feel angry, sad, disappointed, all the feelings, the negative feelings. But to me, the interesting question has always been, what is it that you're trying to achieve? What is it? What's the why? behind the emotion and the why behind the behavior. So that's where I came up with my approach.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Yeah, it really amazes me that going through school and the fact that at one point they were thinking there was no use of you, being that you have the opinion that yeah, emotion drivers decisions other than the rationale. And it's getting to kind of being after 30 years down the line. It shows that yeah, it's that simple. It's really amazing. So you have said that your work began from live experience. What were those challenges those or events that shape your thinking?
Yeah. So, yeah, I had a lot of challenges. One of which was, I guess it's sort of symptomatic of where I was coming from. I was not really emotionally ready for college, and because I was, wanted to be in my band, I wanted to,
Yeah.
play music. We had a bunch of gigs lined up at at CBGB in New York and Madame Wong's in LA, and it was sort of the height of that scene. And one of the things that kind of told me that I made the right decision was sort of just a really weird thing that happened. I left the band. Another guy took my spot. They were at a party that I would have been at, and a fight broke out. The new guy ended up getting stabbed in a fight, and he died.
Mm.
And I took that as sort of a sign from the universe that I had made the right choice, that I should, continue exploring, looking at this emotion that I felt in a different way. And it took me, a few years to kind of really figure it out. And I met my wife there, and she wasn't my wife at the time; she was my girlfriend, but she really helped me kind of figure out, how to sort of channel my emotion toward something positive. And I did. And I think through that and through other challenges that I've experienced more recently, it really made me realize that there's a kind of a larger purpose to people's lives if they choose to kind of reach out and define it.
Mm.
And I spent a long time not really defining it. I was sort of on autopilot. When everything is taken away from you, that really forces you to kind of redefine your purpose and what matters to you. And it's interesting, like when that happened to me, sort of in the middle of my career, that's the point at which it sparked this huge burst of creativity. That's when I kind of got this model published, and I continued to publish. I was publishing, 3 to 4 papers a year. I wrote my book. I wrote a couple of fiction novels, and it was like none of that would have happened if I hadn't like sunken into a hole. It's unfortunate that we as humans, have to suffer adversity in order to have that spark, come into our lives. It's very hard to sort of will it into being.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, yeah, and it's really amazing knowing to the fact that sometimes we don't know what we're capable of doing. We don't even know what we ought to do, except more like having those tragic moments that actually get to kick us in the boot and say, "Oh, I think I should get started doing this," other than just wasting those a whole lot of materials. And yeah, amazing. So, at what point did you start noticing pattern in your emotional distress that traditional psychology wasn't fully explaining?
Yeah, so that was clear to me, I think, in my first week of graduate school when we were introduced to what they called the mini theories of motivation. And the reason they call them mini theories is because there was like a cottage industry of creating new little theories of motivation with fun names like, the need for affiliation, the need for power, the need for achievement. You had Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you had the need for safety, the need for belonging, the need for esteem, the need for self-actualization. And you had all of these little theories depending on the person's mindset and what they studied. So Maslow studied high performing, self actualized people. So it was a very unusual group. And he said there's only like 1% of humanity that will ever become self actualized. It's very pessimistic. David McClelland focused on work and organization. So he looked at power and building coalitions and achievement. And Czech and Mihaly looked at people who were artists and athletes. So he looked at people who were sort of having flow states in the moment. So he kind of proposed this need for flow experiences, sort of immersion, absorption. So you had all these different theories and no meta theory that could actually make sense of them. There was no way to tell if we were being redundant, if we were double counting the same need. There was no way to tell if we had exhausted the full set. Have we done everything? And also, when you're doing research, it's pretty good to know what the full range is so you don't miss certain things. Like the need for justice is one that was completely ignored for a long time. The need for purpose, also completely ignored for a long time. So I kind of looked at this like there's an opportunity here to define this based on first principles. So to me, the first principles were, motivation is all about change, right? I need to change
Mm.
from this state to another state in order to preserve balance, homeostasis, right? So the first question about change is, where do I want to make a change in my life? And I looked at the literature, I looked at all the different religions. I looked at world philosophy, and what kept coming up again and again were these four domains of life. There was sort of the domain of the self, the domain of the social, sort of myself versus other people. Then there's the material versus the spiritual, right?
Yeah.
There's the sort of, things and money and work and play versus concepts, ideals, principles. So those are the four domains. You have self, social, material, spiritual. And then the other side of it, I borrowed from Aristotle. He had these three modes of existence, sort of a state of pure potential, which is sort of foundational. Then there's a sort of state of becoming as you transform from one thing into another, and there's a state of actualization when you've reached the goal. So what I did is I took these four life domains, I crossed them by these three, states of striving or development, and lo and behold, we have 12 cells.
Mm.
Turns out that those 12 cells account for every single one of those theories that's ever been proposed. And I went to great trouble to basically show how everything from the literature fits into one of those cells, and there's nothing left over. The other major insight that I brought to this was that in every one of those cells, there's a positive side and a negative side, that you can want more of the good or you can want less of the bad.
Yeah.
So let's take safety. Safety is sort of the foundational, within the self, it's the first need. I can want to feel less unsafe. Like currently, there's bullets flying around or whatever it is, like I'm feeling unsafe. I want to get rid of that feeling, right? That's very different than somebody who's already pretty safe, but has a need for higher and higher levels of security. So they hire a bodyguard or they move into a gated community with a security on, there are
Yeah.
different ways of looking at safety. That one is a negative need, one is a positive need, and that same logic extends to every one of the cells in the matrix. So the basic logic is that in each one of these four domains of life, if you try to satisfy the foundational need, and once you've satisfied that, the experiential need becomes salient, and you work on that. And once you've satisfied that, you can move up to the aspirational one. So within the domain of the self, first thing is safety. I need to feel safe. If I don't feel safe, I'm not going to be able to
Yeah.
be my authentic self, right? That's the next level, the experiential. Like I can't speak in my own voice and, really show my art, that kind of thing, or be who I am. If I do feel safe, then I can do that. And there's no way I'm going to get to the top level of in the self, which is self-actualization or potential, unless I can speak in my own voice and
Mm.
really, live authentically. So if I'm just trying to sound like somebody else, or I'm trying to sound like William Blake, or I'm trying to sound like my professor, or I'm trying to sound like ChatGPT, that's not going to bring me to self-actualization. It has to be your authentic voice. So that same logic happens in all four of these domains. In the social domain, it starts with inclusion. You have to feel like you're part of your community or group or tribe. If you do, then you can begin to form like one-on-one deep relationships,
Mm.
caring, trust. If you have that, then from a lifetime of doing those good deeds, you will be accorded a certain amount of esteem, like people will respect you, right? Validation. In the material domain, it begins with autonomy. I have to feel that I have the permission, the resources, the tools to take action. If I have those things, I can move into immersion, which is I'm now in the process of building, creating, doing my best work. I look up and then I've created something amazing, and that's when success occurs. You can't get to success if you don't immerse yourself. And
Yeah.
you can't immerse yourself unless you have the permission and the tools to do it.
Mm.
And then finally, in the spiritual domain, it all starts with justice. There has to be a basic sense that in your system that you live in, good is rewarded and bad is punished. If that's not there, you're kind of stuck. You're going to be focused on remedying the injustices that are going on around you. If you do have a basically fair system, then you can begin thinking about applying those principles to self-interest and saying, okay, in the gray areas of life, when is self-interest too much self-interest? Am I being completely honest about my claims that I'm making? Am I being totally transparent about my intentions and motives, all that sort of thing? Only when you've got justice and ethics in place can you begin to start thinking about a higher purpose. And this is something that I borrowed from a lot of theologians throughout the ages, from Maimonides, St. Thomas Aquinas, Martin Luther King Jr. They all make the same point. Jonathan Edwards, they all say the only way to tell if a spiritual awakening is genuine is if it's having a positive effect in terms of justice and ethics. So
Mm.
they're saying basically that if you're just trying to go get high, I'm just going to go take some acid or mushrooms and I'm going to go and experience something profound. That's not true higher purpose. That's not transformative. It has to be built on justice and ethics. And if it's not for real. It's not genuine. So
Justice
that's the model.
and ethic. Yeah, yeah, it's really amazing. From self to social, from social to material, material to spiritual. Yeah, this is really amazing, and your crossbreeding across each of them, it's really, really amazing. So lastly, looking back, what moments stand out as the turning points in finding your voice and mission?
So I would say, it really was for me. There was a few of them. I'd say, uh, in addition to kind of, having some hard times, in my life, they were unexpected. That really kind of forced me to kind of think about this stuff in a serious way and in a systematic way. And when my parents passed, they were a huge influence on me. My father was a neurologist and he focused a lot on the brain and how the brain basically shapes behavior. He focused a lot on criminals and murderers. Are they actually in control of themselves, the ones who are sort of like repeat murderers, or not? And my mother was a psychiatric social worker, and she focused on more the spiritual kind of care. So I had these two influences, and something about when your parent passes, it really kind of brings up a lot of that stuff, and that happened to happen. So I kind of had these sort of negative experiences. Then my dad passed, then my mom passed. And I think the cumulative effect of those things was to kind of really focus me in a serious way on these ideas and to take seriously this idea that I have a kind of an obligation to share them with the world and to kind of write it up as a real system. So that's what I've been doing. Yeah. Unfortunately, it takes a lot of negative events to really kind of,
Yeah,
focus you. Positive events don't do it in the same way. You feel like celebrating and taking a nap.
yeah,
It's bad events that make you get serious.
yeah. Thank you so much, JD. This has really been lovely, especially more like how you analyze each and everything, the coming up with the 12 points. And yeah, it's really amazing and a whole lot to actually learn here. So, JD, from our audience who would love to reach out and learn more from you, or for those who would love to actually more like, yeah, get your perspective in some couples of stuff, how can they reach out and where is the best platform?
Yeah, best way to do it is probably on LinkedIn. It's JD Pincus on LinkedIn, and I think I'm the only one. So if you just put in
Yeah,
JD Pincus, it'll find me. And yeah, feel free to reach out, message me, and eager to talk to anybody about this. We're actually doing a lot of work with some partners in different parts of the world now. We actually have some people in Nigeria doing work. We have a contract in Ukraine with the students there, basically measuring their well-being using this system.
mm,
We have doing this at a college in New York State. So we're open to talking to anybody about, where else we can apply this to try to, basically lift people up and make them sort of emotionally more well.
amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, GP. Your work refrain how we actually understand human behavior by shifting the focus from blame to clarity. Your journey also shows that when we begin to understand emotional need at a deeper level, we don't just explain behavior, we unlock a more compassionate and practical ways of living and working with ourselves and others. Yeah, it's really amazing and it's a pleasure and honor having you on the show, JP.
Well,
Yeah.
my pleasure, and it was good to be with you.